Greetings.
Hello.
You are listening to the Native Business Podcast, the second episode of the Native Business Podcast. And we are very happy to be presenting this, our very second episode to you.
Yes, and this second episode is actually a very special episode because it was recorded live at the Native Business Summit that took place last month, May 13th through the 15th at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It did.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing event. We had over 300 folks that came and joined us. And at the summit, we had a series of sessions, breakouts. We had 24 different sessions and breakouts. 6 of those sessions were recorded as podcasts.
Yes.
And so we knew that we were going to have this be a component of Native Business. By the way, my name is Gary Davis, publisher of Native Business, and you are?
Carmen Davis, executive editor and publisher of Native Business Magazine.
Well, thank you. Okay, I think that might be important that people know who we are. So we're going to get into this podcast right now, but we wanted to give you a little background information on how it came to exist, a little bit about what you're getting ready to listen to. Of course, guest host Mika Leonard of the Miami Nation there in Oklahoma, and great host. I think she did an amazing job.
She did amazing. Yeah.
All of these 6 different podcasts. This particular podcast was over the topic of hemp. And, in the agriculture sector. And specifically, it was titled Industrial Hemp, Doing Well by Doing Good. And this podcast will discuss the tremendous business potential of legal industrial hemp and the thousands of products it can produce. In addition to being a profitable agricultural commodity, hemp is environmentally positive and can remove carbon from the air and toxins from the land. Native-owned businesses have unique opportunities and commercial advantages in the hemp industry and can partner with tribes and other enterprises to create sustainable crops and in-demand value-added products. So this was the discussion. It happened there on the main stage, the podcast stage at the summit. And again, Mika Leonard was the guest host. And then, of course, we had several panelists, very notable panelist, none more so than Vincent Logan, who is the Chief Financial Officer, Chief Investment Officer of the Native American Agriculture Fund. We had Aaron Fournier, Co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of Native American Hemp, Greg Goodell, attorney at Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, G. Blake Jackson, Policy Officer and Staff Attorney for the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative at the University of Arkansas, and Kobe Smith, who is a principal in Salt Plains Hemp, which is a company that focused on hemp again. So it is an amazing podcast, just over probably about an hour in length. And we want to make sure that you kind of had a little bit of context. We're going to get ready to go live now to that. And we also want to remind folks to visit nativebusinessmag.com.
Yes, and you can subscribe to the magazine there. It is free. You just have to enter your address.
The print
is free.
Yes.
Digital issue, there is a small...
A nominal, stupid cheap amount of money that you would pay for the digital
but you
version.
can also subscribe to our newsletter as well. You will receive a weekly newsletter of just kind of the roundup of the week for the news.
And any important updates via email. And then, of course, we have our social media, which is Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Please be sure and visit us there on Instagram, Facebook. You can see us there, I guess, at Native Business Magazine. And then on Twitter, at Native Biz Mag. And then on YouTube, please go subscribe, because once we get enough subscribers, we get the privilege of having a URL that you can go to. But right now, just go to YouTube and search. You can also get an amazing amount of video content there, things that'll help you grow your business, things that'll help you learn, grow, and also stay up on all the great things that we're doing here. Of course, you can get the podcast as a YouTube video, both a vlog, I guess, or a live video podcast, where this will be shown, and you may be even listening to that there right now, or you can just listen to the audio on YouTube, whichever you choose. So with no further ado, we'd like to get into the hemp discussion that transpired at the Native Business Summit. We'll take you to that right now, and good stuff.
Welcome to the Native Business Podcast. This is a live taping. This is very exciting. We've never done a podcast before. I've never hosted before. I don't know if anybody in this group has been on a podcast before. Looks like we have one that has. So this is a first for a lot of us. Thank you again for being here. We have a very interesting topic that we're going to be talking about with this group of experts. So to get started, my name, as mentioned before, is Mika Leonard. I am an enrolled member of the Miami Tribe, which is located about an hour and some change from here, so very happy to be back in Oklahoma. I am joined here by Mr. Vincent Logan, who is the Chief Financial Officer and the Chief Investment Officer of the Native American Agriculture Fund. To my left, I have Aaron Fournier, co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of Native American Hemp and a very recent OU Law School grad as of this past Saturday. To his left, I have Mr. Kobe Smith, Principal, Salt Plains Hemp, LLC. And on our far left, we have Blake Jackson, JD, Policy Officer and Staff Attorney, Indigenous Food and Agricultural Initiative at the University of Arkansas. And last but not least, on our far right, we have Mr. Greg Goodell, Attorney, Hobbs, Strauss, Dean, and Walker. And this is in all of your conference booklets, but I'm going to go ahead and read about our panel today. So this session is called Agriculture, Industrial Hemp, Doing Well by Doing Good. Now, this session will discuss the tremendous business potential of legal industrial hemp and the thousands of products it can produce. In addition to being a profitable agricultural commodity, hemp is environmentally positive and can remove carbon from the air and toxins from the land. Native-owned businesses have unique opportunities and commercial advantages in the hemp industry and can partner with tribes and other enterprises to create sustainable crops and in-demand value-added products. And with that, we will get started. So I think a lot of people in this room might have this question. I certainly do. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to answer this for us. But what is hemp?
That's a really great question. So hemp is kind of known in a lot of different ways, but the way I like to describe hemp and the way I like to think about it is that there are three main economic products that you can make with the cannabis family of plants. One of those is marijuana, another is medicinal hemp or CBD, and then the third is industrial hemp. And so when you think of hemp, really you're talking about medicinal hemp, the CBD, or the industrial hemp. And today, like you mentioned, we're talking specifically about the industrial hemp side and the products that can be made with that and kind of the current legal status of hemp. But hemp is a plant that's been grown across the world for thousands of years. Some believe it to be one of the first crops that people actually cultivated. So it's been around for a long time, and when it was first naturally grown, it didn't have high percentages of THC, which is the psychoactive compound of marijuana, and it didn't have high percentages of CBD, which is kind of the medicinal side of the medicinal hemp. It had very low percentages of all the cannabinoids that are in the plant, and it was used primarily for the textiles and making fabric like canvas. Canvas is actually a word that's derived from another language that has to relate to the cannabis plant, the cannabis family. So canvas and cannabis are related in that sense. But today we're seeing kind of a resurgence of industrial hemp. It's grown differently than marijuana or medicinal CBD hemp is. You want to grow really close together. You're doing hundreds to thousands of seeds per acre, and so you're going to have plants that are growing really close together and that are getting 8, 10, 12 feet tall or more. And it's something that we really need to be looking at for the environmental qualities, and that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about later as well, I think. But yeah, so hemp, it really has it's the three things. It can be marijuana, it can be medicinal hemp, but here we're talking about industrial hemp, the product's application, and you can think of it like wine. That there's Merlot and Pinot Noir, and so this is kind of, it's a different varietal and it's a different species.
Well, thank you for that. And I think there are a couple more than 3 types of wine, but we won't get into that on this podcast. We will be talking about beer tomorrow, though. So be sure to come back for that. So thank you for kind of contextualizing that for us. I think, it is kind of confusing, and it's this word you hear thrown around a lot. Obviously, there's a lot happening on the legislative front with, the legalities concerning the plant. Obviously, different states have different laws. I come in from Denver, so, you all know what's going on there. Also, Aaron, before we kind of jump to some other questions, can you tell us a little bit about your organization, what your mission is, kind of what you're set up to do, and just help folks understand, sort of what your goals are in working in this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, I started a company called Native American Hemp, and I have 3 members. We're a Native-owned company, and our goal is to help tribes, tribal members, and farmers grow industrial hemp across the country. And so we're currently doing that. We're, like has been mentioned earlier, in the presentations this morning, is that, doing partnerships, doing joint ventures, that's exactly what we're doing. We're working with tribes, we're working with individuals, and we're helping them to get into this new market for the United States, to really help them to grow into this business. Back in 1938, Popular Mechanics wrote an article calling hemp the next billion-dollar industry. Unfortunately, right after that, there were taxes and licenses and regulations that were placed on hemp, which caused the business to collapse. But now we're back, and hemp is back, and we're seeing that to really be the next billion-dollar business. If you include marijuana and CBD and industrial hemp, it already is a billion-dollar industry here in the United States. In 2017, there were $820 million worth of retail products that were sold in the U.S. that were hemp-related products. So this is something that the market is showing that people are very interested in, and Native American Hemp is here to help tribes, tribal members, and farmers get into this business.
Well, those are definitely some exciting numbers, and I know just based on some conversations I was having with some folks in the room here today that there is a tremendous amount of interest from the tribal communities about, how to even approach this type of business. So I think with that, people start asking the questions of, okay, first of all, is this even legal? How do I actually go about doing this? So I know we have an expert here. Mr. Greg Goodell, again, is going to talk to us about, what is the legal status federally for various states? How do tribes fit into this? All of those questions that I'm sure are going on in your head right now. How do we actually set this business up? So, Greg, if you would walk us through some of that, I think that the audience would certainly really appreciate it.
Sure, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and it's a pleasure to share all of this interesting information. And it really is a transformative time in America right now, legally and agriculturally, with regard to the hemp product. And tribes are in a position, I think, to capitalize on this in a sort of once-in-a-generation ground floor opportunity way. But there is a very specific legal landscape that relates to industrial hemp. It's not overly complicated, but it's important to understand because anybody, tribal or otherwise, who wants to get involved in the cultivation, growing, processing, and selling of hemp needs to, right now, basically go through the same process. And I'll talk in a minute about some opportunities specific to tribe that I know our panelist Blake is working on as well, where self-regulation for tribes is on the horizon. But for now, basically, for everyone who wants to get involved in hemp, the landscape and the journey to get from today to where you're growing and selling is essentially the same. And this is all very new. As Aaron noted, around World War II, hemp was a major agricultural product in the United States. He showed me a video one time of a film from World War II called Hemp for Victory, where it was something really fundamental to how America viewed its industrial agriculture. But then it got caught up in the relationship legally and socially with marijuana. Hemp is not the same thing as marijuana. It does have the same plant family background, but it really is very different in terms of the uses. But for 60 plus years, hemp and marijuana were viewed by the federal government as essentially the same. They were looked at the same way in terms of a prohibition, and it really wiped out an entire industry. And it's only in the last couple of years where science has spoken up, social communities have spoken up, farmers have spoken up and said, look, can can we look at this in a real light now and understand that scientifically it's a different plant and legally should be viewed as a different plant as well. So starting a couple of years ago, Congress began to realize, let's see if we can't get a more fair approach, in my view, to how hemp is viewed legally and start separating it from marijuana in a way that makes it a viable crop, at least on an experimental basis. So what Congress authorized starting last year was industrial hemp could be grown within the United States pursuant to a state-certified agricultural program. So you had a couple of steps that were put in place there. The federal government was saying, we are going to allow hemp to be grown, but only in states, number one, that would allow it within their state. So we go from a federal regulation down to a state regulation. Some states immediately said, yes, we're going to allow that here. Other states did not. And to this day, there are some states where the industrial hemp that we're talking about that's perfectly legal now here in Oklahoma is not legal in other states. So we have to look first at the state regime and understand which states have allowed it. Then the states are allowed to do their own certification and licensing process. And a lot of those are fairly similar in terms of the steps. I think they were developed to some extent in discussions with the USDA and other policymakers. But what I'll describe is what the rules are here in the state of Oklahoma, which are, I think, fairly similar to the other regimes you would see in other states. So Oklahoma, starting last year, implemented the Industrial Hemp Pilot Program. And the way that is structured is a partnership program where universities and colleges that want to be involved in hemp on a research basis could notify the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture that they wanted to be a licensee for growing hemp. Now, the college and university did not have to control every aspect of the hemp growing operation, but they had to be a part of it, and a license would only be issued to grow hemp in Oklahoma by the State Department of Agriculture to a college or university that had a plant sciences program of some kind. So this year, for example, there, I believe, are 9 colleges and universities in Oklahoma that are participating in the state's pilot program. From there, the college or university could partner with a third party to get involved in the cultivation, the growing, the processing, the selling of hemp in whatever kind of relationship they wanted as far as responsibilities. So taking the tribal example, you could have a college that gets the license in conjunction with a tribe that has land, and the tribe would then actually have the hemp growing on its land. It could employ its own farmers for growing it. It would just simply be done in conjunction with that college or university as the licensee. In order to get the license here in Oklahoma, there are a few steps that have to be gone through. Number one, you need to have an actual partnership with an authorized college or university. They all essentially use the same contract. And so if you want to grow hemp in Oklahoma and you see your local colleges participating, you can ask them if they will partner with you, and they will issue you a contract, and there's a financial basis for how you interact as far as profit sharing and other fees. If the hemp is going to be grown on your land, or if you are organizing that in terms of the agricultural aspect, you need to provide the state with a full slate of information about the growing area. So you have to have an aerial map of your farm that shows grid coordinates on GPS as to where it's located, so that the state of Oklahoma knows where industrial hemp is being grown. You have to tell them what kind of industrial hemp you're growing. As Kobe will likely explain, there are numerous varietals that do different things and have different uses, so you have to register your particular seed that you are going to plant with the state, and it has to be a seed that's on the state's approved list. You have to demonstrate that the landowner is authorizing that hemp be grown on the land. So, for example, if it's tribally owned land, you could have the executive committee or the realty office or whoever was responsible for that particular plot of land, trust land or otherwise, give a letter to the state that says, yes, we authorize that to happen. So you put that basic information together, provide it to the state will then issue a license. This year, a license costs for each growing area, so each contiguous field or each greenhouse or wherever you're going to grow, license fee, flat fee of $500 plus $5 an acre if you're growing outdoors on an outdoor plot, or relative to square footage if you're growing indoors. So there's an additional fee based on size. You give the state your projected planting date and projected harvesting date. And 30 days out from your harvesting date, the state will come out and do an inspection of your crop, and they will test it for THC level. The level that's allowed in Oklahoma is 0.3 THC. And so you have just this very minimal amount that's allowed under the state law. They come out and test that. As long as your crop tests below that level, then it's legal, you can harvest, and you move on with what your program is. If, on the other hand, the crop tests hot, meaning your THC level is too high, they may do some retests to confirm if that's an anomaly, but if it's clear that you've grown a field that is above that 0.3 level of THC, that is not a legal crop, and the state will order it to be destroyed. So one of the things that's very crucial in terms of seed sourcing is to understand what it is that you're getting and make sure that you're getting it in true hemp form and not a seed that's been crossbred or otherwise is going to produce something that's got too high of a level. One of the things that's been very encouraging in talking to the Department of Agriculture here in Oklahoma is that they are very eager to see this industry succeed in the state. We have a new interim hemp director for the department, Sarah Wallace, extremely smart, extremely helpful, friendly person who wants to see this get going. She's extremely interested as well in seeing tribes get involved because she understands the opportunities. So this is one of those great areas where we have actually a governmental partner that is working well in a partnering role with farmers who want to grow hemp. So in terms of getting things done in Oklahoma, we've got, I think, a good structure that's easy to understand, not terribly difficult to work through, and people who are helpful at the state level and who want to see it go forward.
Well, thank you for that wrap-up, and that's certainly very encouraging to hear, and I'm glad this is being recorded because there were a lot of steps that were mentioned there, so if any of you were trying to furiously take down notes, you'll be able to go back and listen to this. I guess one question, and I'm sure there's quite a bit of variance in this answer, but if everything sort of magically happened the way it was supposed to, what kind of timeline could folks be looking at from if at the tribal council level they say, yes, this is an industry we're going to launch into, to actually being able to use the product and make some money? What's that timeline look like?
And Aaron and Kobe will be able to talk more details as people who are actually doing this on the ground. But hemp is essentially a 120-day crop from the day that you plant it until you harvest it, and so you're looking at sometime maybe in May usually, and then harvesting sometime in September. The decision process in terms of how the tribe gets involved is going to be tribe by tribe specific in what they want to do. Certainly the first step, I would say, at the executive level is to understand these licensing requirements, understand your business case, and then want to move forward on that basis. But really, as far as getting involved, getting a crop going, it's probably one of the easier and more efficient ones to do, simply because there is some infrastructure in place now legally. It's not terribly complicated. You've got good people involved now who can give guidance on doing it. So it is still realistic for a tribe starting today to get a crop in the ground in 2019. Certainly more than realistic to do it for 2020, even if you wanted to start just fresh from the discussion point. So this is a here and now economic opportunity for tribes, not something that we're looking out years to do. It's actually available today.
Well, you guys heard it here first, and feel free to come bug Greg after the presentation to learn more about this. I think actually I want to transition over to Kobe. I'm still sort of trying to wrap my head around this actual growing process, and as Greg had mentioned, this idea that they're coming in and testing your crop to test for THC levels, how do you make sure you're essentially growing this the correct way as someone who has very little growing experience and barely manages to keep a garden alive every year, a house plant, in fact. I would just love to know from your experience what that looks like, and literally what it, from when you put the seed in and how you make sure the soil is set up the way it's supposed to, all of that. I just think that would be helpful if you could give us some of that info.
Sure. Is this on? Yep. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Kobe Smith with Salt Plains Hemp, and I started this business last year after, I guess, April came around and they passed the state legislation to allow for the hemp pilot program. So I partnered with Connor State University on a research pilot program for research and development on a industrial hemp field that we grew out for fiber and for grain. We grew a 36-acre field, and although the process to get certified to grow it has been simplified. It's been lined out. There's instructions out there, and you did a great job of explaining that process. But the process for actually growing it is not easy. There's not a playbook out there. This crop's been grown for a few years across the United States and a few other states. Kentucky, North Carolina are two of the main ones that have grown industrial hemp. And so when we purchased seed, we went and we sought out the advice of the growers that had grown it the previous year, and even some of the advice that we took and implemented didn't end up being good advice for us, because we're in a different state. We've got a different climate here, and so these plants they're gonna grow and develop different phenotypes and everything else when you take them out of their natural environment and go plant them somewhere else. And so there was a lot of challenges that we were faced with, and there's a lot that we've learned throughout that process. And what I would suggest is, I guess, an answer to your question. And what I learned is there's not a whole lot that you can do when you put the plant outside to control whether or not that plant is going to exceed that THC threshold. The best thing that you can do is a proactive measure, and that's making sure that you've got a reliable seed source, a seed supplier, that you've got certificate of analysis from that previous growing season that shows what that crop did in terms of THC. And that's one thing that we did do right, is we picked the right supply source, went right to the grower. We had the analysis. We knew what we were getting in terms of THC. The unfortunate thing is that grower didn't know what he was doing when he was harvesting, and he harvested it closer to 90 days on a seed crop versus 120 days. When you do that, you have immature seeds that are in the crop, and so our germination rate ended up being about 50%. Germination. So although we picked the right seed source, we took the advice, put all the trust in that guy, spent a lot of money on the seed, we were faced with a lot of challenges with 50% germ rate and having to battle a lot of weeds and other things that we weren't expecting. And so the best thing you can do to prepare is to make sure that you have a reliable seed source, make sure that you're partnering or that you're communicating with somebody that's got experience, that's done that before, that's faced a lot of the challenges such as what we faced last year. And that's something that my company with Salt Plains Hemp, we realized that there was a lack of education. We realized there's not many reliable genetics companies out there. Heck, the research on this crop has not been there. You look at the last hundreds of years where we've had the best scientists, agronomists, researchers that have put all of the money into bettering the kernel of corn or the wheat seed or soybeans or whatever it is. That technology and that research has not been done on industrial hemp. So there's a big opportunity for genetics, for crossbreeding to get different varieties, to breed specifically to help mitigate some of the issues we face today, like a 12 or 13 foot tall crop that we don't have harvesting equipment to run through. We've had to make modifications on the farm to certain farm implements to be able to harvest and process the crop. And so in the future, there will be opportunities for genetics to come along and maybe breed a crop that's shorter in stem, that's easier for our combines and harvesting equipment to get off the field. And that's the other thing, is we harvested last year, and we knew that we were doing that in anticipation for holding back seed for the following years so that we could grow a bigger crop. But the excess seed that we wanted to experiment with, we quickly realized that there's a lack of processing capabilities out there. And so whether you're growing the crop for the seed or growing it for the fiber properties of it, there's a huge disconnect in the industry for processing to get it from the raw product into a processed form to get to the finished market. And so in doing so, we, in learning this gap, we created another business called Scalability. And Scalability, we chose that name for a reason. When you get involved in industrial hemp, I would caution everybody to do it, scale it to size. And so, I don't encourage, I get calls all the time from people that want to go out and plant 1,000 acres of this stuff, and they don't even know where to start. And I'm just like, well, let's start with 1 acre, or let's start with 10 acres, and then we can build up from there. So scalability, that business is a total supply chain solutions. And so everything from the seed to the planting, growing, harvesting, fertilizing, processing, finished products, everything in between. It's a total supply chain solutions company that is there to help those growers and other processors in the industrial hemp industry. And so for processing, once you grow hemp, you can decide to grow it as a seed or as fiber or both. So there's some varieties out there that are called dual purpose varieties that if you have the right farm implements or access to those farm implements, you can grow a single crop and get 2 different revenue streams from that crop, and potentially, as we develop better genetics, get 3 in the future, where you'll be able to cut the crop down, cut the seed off the top of the crop, and then soak the stalk of the crop in an ethanol bath as an example to pull out CBD out of the plant stalks, and then to go further to refine the fiber into bass fiber or herd fiber, which would be your clothing products or insulation or whatever it is. And so we're focused on that, on processing and on educating those in the industry that are interested in growing it and helping them succeed and get to where they want to be. So.
Well, thank you, Kobe, for that. And that's, again, Kobe Smith with Salt Plains Hemp, LLC. Thank you for sharing that piece about scalability. Obviously, scaling is an important lesson, I think, in any small business, and I'm sure something we'll be hearing about throughout this conference. Next, I want to turn things over to Blake Jackson, who, again, is the Policy Officer and Staff Attorney for the Indigenous Food and Agricultural Initiative at the University of Arkansas. I'd like for you to share with us a little bit more about the initiative, how it got started, the purpose, and then explain to us a lot of the things that are happening with the 2018 Farm Bill, all the various USDA regulations. And now we've heard from Greg on sort of the legal components for different states. From a federal perspective, again, I understand that the Farm Bill is really obviously very important to this industry. So if you could again tell us a little bit about the initiative and then give us some background on some of those pieces, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. As like I said, my name is Blake Jackson. I'm with the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative at the University of Arkansas. And we are a technical free resource to tribes, and we kind of exist in the space in between federal Indian law and food and agricultural law and policy. And we try to facilitate economic development through providing strategic legal analysis and policy analysis and some sort of value-added economic analysis to help tribes in this space and tribal producers. We were originally started in 2013 by Janie Sims Hipp, who was the Undersecretary for Tribal Relations under Secretary Vilsack, and Stacy Leeds, who is an attorney in the field of Indian law, who was then dean at the University of Arkansas Law School. And they got together and said, we're at this very unique space with the tribal law expertise on staff and also having a very prominent food and agricultural law program in the nation. So kind of wedding those two together, that formed our organization. We are now at the Office of Economic Development, as Dean Leeds is now the Vice Chancellor of Economic Development at the University of Arkansas. So we kind of have a presence of being university-wide and being nationwide and helping tribes in this space. Some of the work we've done is we've released a model tribal food and agriculture code for tribal governments to alter and adopt various sections of. It's over 900 pages and has a very comprehensive set of laws that people can tailor. We also are the National Technical Training Center for the FDA under the Food Safety Modernization Act for tribal growers under the Produce Safety Rule. So those are just some of the work that we're involved in. So we're kind of involved also with the Native Farm Bill Coalition, which is a group of tribes who have gotten together to collectively advocate for specific provisions in the Farm Bill and various pieces of agricultural policy legislation. We are the research partner for that organization that has over 170 different members. And so what we do is do a lot of research into what is the law looking like now? What will that look like in the future? And how can that be better suited for tribes as the Native Farm Bill Coalition asks us to look into these things? And one of these issues is obviously industrial hemp. We originally saw the legalization, as Greg pointed out, with the pilot programs in the 2014 Farm Bill, and that allowed a tribal government to grow industrial hemp in partnership with a state Department of Agriculture or an institution of higher education, so long as the growth was authorized by the state law at the time. But one barrier that we see to accessing this is in some states that there's not always that relationship that exists between state governments and tribal governments. So effectively, if that is not legal under state law, tribes are not provided a way into that market. So one thing that the 2018 Farm Bill did was provided parity and allowed tribes to have equal access to the industrial hemp market. So that's one thing that we see going forward. But expanding that, states and tribes both can regulate industrial hemp production within their respective jurisdictions. But there are a few things that need to be achieved before this regulatory authority can be assumed. The first of those is that a tribal government or a state has to develop what you call a hemp production plan. And there are 7 requirements in that deal with how are you going to maintain the land records for those who are growing, how are you going to conduct your random inspections, how are you going to test the crop. There's 7 different requirements in there dealing with that. And when you have all those methodologies specified and how you're going to achieve those things, you have to submit that to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And the Secretary of Agriculture has 60 days to either approve or deny your plan after conferring with the United States Attorney General. And if you are approved and your tribal law allows for it, you're free to grow, or state law in that case. But one thing that we're seeing right now is the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service is the agency that is charged with regulating this new market and this new crop with regard to production. And as with any law, we have to go through, we have the law that's adopted, but you have to have regulations interpreting that and enforcing that law further. And at the time that we're at right now, there are no regulations for industrial hemp under the 2018 authorities on the books. So what the U.S. Department of Agriculture has said is that we have to rely on our 2014 Farm Bill authorities, which, if that state relationship is not there, we're kind of on hold in the tribal market for doing the self-regulation of the growth of industrial hemp. So we have been told November is the time that we're looking at for these regulations to be released, and then going through the rulemaking process to be finalized to accommodate the 2020 growing season, which is kind of unfortunate in terms of market access, because again, if that relationship is not there, we have to rely on provisions of state law in some of these situations. But going forward, the Farm Bill also specified that it did not alter the FDA authority to regulate CBD and THC containing food and drug products. So you see here CBD products, CBD oil, and interstate commerce. The FDA has released a statement that it still views those things as illegal under the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act. And part of the reason for this is that there has been a drug on the market known as Epidiolex, which is an anti-seizure drug for patients 2 and older. And it has a very concentrated dose of CBD as its active ingredient. So much like acetaminophen is the active ingredient in Tylenol, CBD is the active ingredient in this Epidiolex drug that's been investigated and put out by the FDA as being approved. So since the CBD has been approved as an active drug ingredient, the FDA says, no, you can't add that to a food or a medical product without having some sort of regulatory inspection and medical testing done on that. So that's kind of the state of the CBD market right now. At the end of the month, there is a public hearing with the FDA on this matter for interested stakeholders to submit comments on the industry, and that comment period will be open through July 2nd. And there's more information on that on the FDA website. And so that's kind of where we're at legally at the current juncture that we're at. Basically, we're relying on the 2014 authorities. And even then, the Farm Bill allowed for crop insurance for the hemp crop if you wanted to enroll your crop like you could any other grain crop. However, the problem that we have right now is that at the time the 2018 Farm Bill was signed into law, hemp was still viewed under that statutory definition of marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act. So under the 2019 crop insurance year, there is no federal safety net allowed for that. And in the future, industry experts are projecting that could be part of a whole farm policy. So you could take your whole operation and aggregate your revenue and insure that and put hemp in that in the future. And if you have below what historical revenue has been, you can receive an insurance payment in kind for that. But that's not been anything officially released, so we're waiting for more guidance from the USDA on where that's going to go as well.
Well, thank you, Blake. I'm a little confused, I will go ahead and admit, and I assume everybody here is just ready to go out and start growing this stuff right now, right? Yeah, totally easy. But obviously also this makes me realize how gigantic USDA is, but also that it's really encouraging to see, the University of Arkansas having this type of initiative housed within an academic institution, specifically working, with indigenous foods. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting things to see, especially after this comment period is up and sort of what direction things go. Obviously, this is an interesting political time we're in as well. So thank you for that. I think we'll turn things over to Mr. Vincent Logan, who again is the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Investment Officer at the Native American Agriculture Fund. So I know you've worn many hats in Indian country. I remember when you worked for the Obama administration. And but first, I think, could you tell us a little bit about the fund, what the funding mechanism is, what the purpose is, just what we can sort of be on the lookout for, and any other funding opportunities that folks here in the audience or those listening might be able to take advantage of who are getting into this industry. And then also feel free to tell us more about some of your tokens of wisdom from the other jobs that you've done in the past as well.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in Oklahoma. Vince Logan, a member of the Osage Nation. And I'm here to talk about a few things, but one of them is the Native American Agriculture Trust, which grew out of the Keep Siegel class action lawsuit. Last year, a charitable trust was established under the laws of North Dakota. And the trust agreement is on the website, nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. You can read the trust agreement if you have a lot of spare time. It's a lengthy document. But I'll give you some highlights from the trust agreement. And since this is all new, this is all good news for Indian country. But I want to be very specific about this. So I'm a lawyer too, so I want to literally read some of this from the trust agreement so we get this down before we go forward. There's some specific points I would like to make. The mission of the trust itself. Now remember, this isn't a foundation, this is a trust. There are 4 parts to this: business assistance, agriculture education, technical support, and advocacy. So given that, that's somewhat general language, but you can, when you read the trust agreement, you'll see how that works into the overall trust purpose. So bear in mind those 4 missions. I mean, of course, right now we're talking about agriculture education. We're talking about technical support. Some of the gentlemen here on the panel here are discussing that. But the purpose is to give grants, and so I want to talk about the programmatic side of NAF, as we call it. I'm reading directly from the trust agreement. Who is eligible for a grant? Tax-exempt organizations, generally referred to as the 501c3 organizations, educational organizations, and all of this is within the trust agreement itself. For more reading, you can refer to that. Community development financial institutions, or the CDFIs, of which there are Native American CDFIs, in more detail in the trust agreement itself. And I want to get this right. Any instrumentality of a state or federally recognized tribe, including a non-profit organization chartered under the tribal law of a state or federally recognized tribe, that furnishes assistance designed to further Native American farming or ranching activities. So given that, as I said, that's from the trust agreement itself. More is forthcoming, and you can please refer to our website, we have a lot of news, and we're building a very active social media presence with updates on the programmatic side. But when I was invited to speak on this panel, I knew obviously some of the speakers, and I wanted to, since I have many years in talking to tribes about economic development and investments, I talk to tribes often about something that I wanted to bring to the panel today, and it's a way of thinking about business ventures and economic development. And it's the decisions are being made along the way at the tribal council level. I always think of it through this lens. Is this decision a strategic decision, or is it a tactical decision? And often confused, and I've worked up a lot of slides on this, and I've given entire presentations on this topic, but it's important today because when I hear even what we've heard today, I'm thinking to myself, this is a tactical decision, or this is a strategic decision. And my message today is that tribal council, tribal leaders, tribal business people always, I preach thinking in these terms because they're both very admirable ways of thinking, but they're both important in any kind of business decision. So let me just give a very quick example, or give some characteristics of strategic thinking first. When you think of strategic thinking, you think of the big picture. You think of vision. They talk about that vision thing. You think of the future. So when you're talking about industrial hemp, is this the future? Well, Aaron said this is also the past. So now we're talking about the future. And is it about change? Are we changing? Is the environment changing? And I don't mean in the sense of the physical environment. I'm talking about the business environment and the industrial environment. When I think about tactical, I'm always thinking about something very immediate. We have a goal. We need to make money. That's not really a goal of a tribal nation, but that is how a lot of people view things. We need to make money, so we need to have a tactical goal. A goal is by November, we need to do this. That is a goal, and that's the way organizations run. I have no problem with that. But just bear in mind, that's a tactical decision-making process. That's not strategic. Strategic somewhat came before then, is whether or not we're going to even get involved in the industrial hemp industry. I always think about how are you viewing this decision? So one of the things about strategic that I love myself is you consider what can be. What can we do here? And that's not always easy to quantify, and you can't put a metric to that because you're really thinking about the future. And of course, we don't have a crystal ball, and I always tell people, throw away your crystal ball because no matter what you're doing, you're probably got it wrong. But it's if I have anything to add to today's panel, it is think strategically, think tactically, but know the difference. Know what your goals are, and know how you really view the environment. So industrial hemp, how does that fit here? What are we really talking about? Are we talking about a tactical move? With the example of suddenly growing 1,000 acres, is that a tactical move, or is that a brilliant strategic move? There isn't an answer to that, but you'll know it when you get there. But my message is just to make sure you understand the differences, and when you present to tribal council, if you're in the business side, or if you are a tribal leader, understand where you're coming from. Hope that helps.
Lost my notes. Absolutely, thank you. And those are just, as you mentioned, good things for anybody to think about certainly when entering into a new, and I would, I think, go ahead and say, a relatively controversial new industry that people are, they're hearing a lot about, maybe want to get interested in. I think, when you see perhaps other folks having a lot of success in that field, you think, well, why wouldn't we get involved in that when just from the, short amount of time we've spent up here, we've learned that it's actually quite complicated, and there's certainly a lot of things that can go wrong. I think we'll certainly come back to you on some of those points. Now that we've talked a little bit about, the legality, literally how things are planted, and I know Aaron touched on this a little bit at the beginning when we started talking about just what is hemp. I'm still curious, and I think some folks here are as well. Can we talk about some of the practical application? What is the actual use? When I think of industrial hemp, my mind just only goes to like clothing, but I know there's a whole lot more to it than that. So I think between Aaron and Kobe, maybe you can share with us, what all this is used for, how it's sold, what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of giving some context, China has been using industrial hemp products to make textiles for centuries. Right now, China is the world leader for textiles, and one of the ways that I could see tribes getting into that is for facilities like this, where you have uniforms for your environmental professionals, for your police officers. We could create textiles not only for those types of uniforms for those individuals. We would be creating a processing facility, a manufacturing facility on the reservation that's employing tribal members, but then that also opens up other doors as well, like 8A. So maybe we could go after doing Department of Defense contracting and stuff like that as well. And so I definitely want to talk more about the products, but that's kind of where I see it going in the future, is that there's so many different applications within that. So textiles is just one piece, and that is kind of the original piece. The founding fathers of the United States grew hemp. George Washington grew hemp. It was a really important crop for not only the textile purpose, but for navies. So as Greg mentioned with Hemp for Victory, during World War II, all of America's supply to hemp from foreign countries, we had stopped producing our own hemp at that point, and we were importing it. Japan had cut off our supply, and so the United States found itself in a situation where, for its navies to be successful, to have the rope for the ships, and to have the canvas for all the different military applications that there were, we had to start growing it ourselves again. And so I would definitely recommend looking up the video. It's on YouTube, called Hemp for Victory, and it provides a really good foundation of here's what industrial hemp is, here's what the seeds look like, and then it really steps farmers through how to grow. And it's a short 15-minute video that the U.S. military put out to help us start to grow it again. Immediately after World War II, hemp was kind of taxed and regulated. You had to have a license to grow it, and the United States wouldn't provide anybody with a license, and so thus hemp kind of became illegal again. But aside from kind of the textile and the canvas and the military applications, there's also building materials. Construction materials is a really big piece of industrial hemp products that's becoming really popular. So the United Kingdom, Europe, and New Zealand are really leading the way right now in the construction materials piece. There's 4 different types of construction materials that people are using right now. Plasters are one of them. The other ones are insulation, like an infill insulation. People are making hempcrete, so a concrete alternative. And then you can also make cinder blocks. Sorry, I almost lost my train of thought. So cinder blocks using like hydroforms, using hydraulic presses to create cinder blocks. So one of the things that Indian country desperately needs is more homes for our citizens. And so one of the things that Native American hemp has been doing is talking with different tribes about these applications, using industrial hemp to not only cultivate it, to grow it on our lands, but to then use it to create facilities for the government and then also for our citizens. So one of the interesting things could be creating traditional style homes. So with the Navajo Nation, for example, using cinder blocks to create the foundation, to create a structure that looks like the Hogan, the traditional Navajo style home, and then to use a hemp-based plaster to cover the outside and the inside of the home. One of the things that we're seeing with I'm going to use a different microphone. One of the things that we're seeing is there's some research that came out of Canada, and hemp-based construction materials can be up to 80% more energy efficient than our standard construction materials that we're using right now. 80%, and that's fascinating. It's really important for traditional people living in Hogans on the Navajo reservation who, really, they might not have access to electricity. So it's, the coal pellet furnaces are going to keep the home warmer for longer. And so we're looking at this as not only a sustainable resource, something that can be grown to 90 to 120 days, but something that can really be beneficial for our communities all the way from cultivation through to actual application, processing and application on the reservations. And other interesting things about the construction materials side of hemp is that it can be up to 40% more sound absorbent than concrete. So if we're looking at the sides of highways and neighborhoods that are built next to highways, we can build sound deadening walls out of hemp-based concrete instead of regular concrete. The other thing is that because it's a renewable resource, it's something that we can grow ourselves and do that way. And so there's also environmental aspects that can be used as kind of a business side. But I think that this is another really interesting piece for Indian country because we are so much more in tune with the environments around us and seeing the changes that are happening in our globe. And so every 1 ton of dried hemp has captured 1.5 to 1.6 tons of carbon dioxide. So hemp as a plant, as a crop, you're creating a carbon negative crop. So one of the things that Native American hemp is doing is we're speaking with a private entity on the East Coast and with some members of the USDA and NRCS on the West Coast to create the foundational level of research that needs to be established so that we can create a carbon credits program so that when tribes are growing hemp, they're not only getting paid from the resulting crop, but they're getting paid to start just by putting the plants in the ground, because by putting the plants in the ground, you're going to be pulling carbon dioxide out of the air. You're going to be purifying the planet. And it goes beyond the air, and so some people call it a miracle crop, and it really is, and I get really excited talking about it. But another fascinating quality of the industrial hemp crop is that it pulls heavy metals and toxins out of the soil. And so this can be a problem if you're growing it as a food source. So there needs to be soil testing that's done anytime that you're looking at doing an industrial hemp crop. But if we think about the application around sites that have a lot of pollution that maybe other plants can't grow, or for example, up in Oklahoma, in northeast Oklahoma with the Tar Creek Superfund site, something that I'm interested in seeing is, can we use the hemp crop to help remediate the soils up there? And I really think we can, based on some of the preliminary research that's been done, is that hemp can withstand not only high toxic environments, but it pulls those toxins into the root system, which we can then pull the entire plant out of the ground and return that soil to a healthy state for all kinds of other applications. And up in Tar Creek, that's a site where the state and the federal government actually had to purchase the land back from individuals and move people away. So that's another interesting opportunity for tribes.
Your enthusiasm is very apparent. It's always exciting to be around somebody who's excited about something. I didn't know much about hemp at all, and obviously I've learned a lot. Tar Creek is where my tribe is located, so I've driven over it. It's a mess. Obviously, if there's anything we can do to clean that up. This really is the superfood of seed, is what it's sounding like. The sort of the application is never ending, and just what you were talking about building homes and stuff is just so exciting. And when you mentioned the 8A piece as well, just the idea of being able to turn this into, sort of a force multiplier for the tribe, and not just a matter of we're going to, create this hemp seed and turn around and sell it or whatever that looks like. So I just think that's really exciting. Obviously, there's a lot sort of happening in the future right now. Kobe, can you tell us a little bit more about other uses? I know we have on here sort of use in cosmetics and soaps and things like that. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say when you look at getting involved in industrial hemp, whether it's a tactical or strategic approach, I really view it, if you approach it the right way, it is very much a strategic approach. There's one word that I like to use with it, it's sustainability. Hemp is a miracle crop. We've talked about the fiber properties of it, the fact that it detoxes the soil, that it pulls carbon dioxide out of the air, but the actual kernel, the seed, is a superfood. It's loaded with all of the amino acids. It's got a lot of the important omegas in it, and very rich in protein and fiber. It's got a fiber source that we're not used to getting in our diets. Our animals aren't used to getting those sources in their diets as well. And in the future, when we have further, legislation, the day will come where we're not the only ones that are consuming the seed. It will be the animals that we're raising as well. And so, as far as the different products, when you grow hemp, you're growing it for either a medicinal form for CBD, the fiber, or the seed, or a combination of the three. We talked about the others, but for seed specific, when you get the seed, two different things that you can do with that. One of them, or three technically, you could eat it or feed it eventually to animals, but the two processing techniques are to either A, crush the seed, and if you crush the seed, you're going to make oil. Hemp oil can go into everything from cooking. Like my girlfriend last night made some Brussels sprouts with hemp oil. It was delicious. I'd like to think her cooking was the main form of it that made it so delicious, but I think the nutty flavor actually helped as well. So, but everything from cooking with it on the stove to running it in your cars eventually for biofuel. Henry Ford, his Model T Ford, he ran off of hemp oil, and his goal actually back in that day was to create a car made completely out of the hemp product, hemp crop itself, and I think he got roughly 30% or something of that done in the car. But as far as the products go, you crush it to make the oil, which could be anything from cooking to biofuel. It also can be a carrier oil for your beauty products, which would be your lotions, your sunscreens, makeup applications, everything. And then the byproduct of crushing that seed, it gives you protein meal. So when you crush a seed, whether it's a soybean or a corn to make ethanol, the product is meal, and it's very high concentration of protein, and a lot of the good nutritional properties of the seed, they transfer into that byproduct, and that byproduct is one of the most valuable pieces of products, I guess, or finished products that you can get out of hemp. It goes into protein flour to bake with. There's a lot of different uses for it, but protein flour is the thing it's going to be a bigger part of our diets in the future. We're going to go to your milkshake store to get your specialty shake, and they're going to be putting in hemp flour in the future. The alternative method of processing the seed is to crack the seed, to de-hull it. So similarly to what they do with sunflower seeds, when they de-hull the sunflower seed and you've got the inner heart of it, the finished product is called hemp hearts. And so again, the hemp hearts, it's kind of like a granola type structure that you can put in your yogurt, your cereals, a lot of different applications for it, your shakes. So the main products, I guess, once you get the seed, is to either crush it to make the oil and the protein flour to then further refine into other products, or you would de-hull it to make hemp hearts, and then you use the spent hull for different properties as well, for fiber properties, bedding, can go back into animal feed, and a lot of different things. So, but sustainability ultimately is what I come back to. There's not another crop in existence that can provide what hemp can provide in terms of housing, clothing, the medicinal properties, the fact that you can use the carrier oil to go into a lot of different products that you want to make. And also the nutritional value of it as well. I mean, being able to feed yourself, to do it, in a better form with the superfood, to be able to house yourself, be able to put clothes on your back. to be able to fuel your car and even make components that go into cars or any other, of the 25,000 different products that hemp goes into. It truthfully is a super crop that is a strategic investment, because I really see the opportunity for micro communities, whether it's in the Indian nations or small farming communities, in my neck of the woods in northwest Oklahoma, where we're setting up processing capabilities. We're supplying genetics to these farmers, educating them to go out, grow the crops, bring it right back home like a local co-op, process those products into finished products, and create more value at home for those farmers and ranchers. And so I really believe in the crop, and I think there's huge opportunities for anybody that gets involved in it. But it's not just a business opportunity that you're going to go grow it and sell it to the open market. It's what can we do at home? What can we build that is sustainable for our communities and for our people? So, thanks.
Well, thank you for that. Oh, a little bit more from Aaron.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Kobe was saying, and so he talked about the biofuels, and that reminded me that, so with the biofuels, some research has shown that 1 acre of hemp can produce around 1,000 gallons of gasoline equivalent biofuel. But in addition to, so the oil, the seeds, you can make oil to make the biofuel, but also with the outside portion of the plant, it's a woody material. And there's actually a town in Germany, they had a coal-fired power plant, and because of regulations with carbon dioxide and things like that, they were finding that they were going to have to shut down their coal-fired power plant. The community kind of got together. There was some basic research that was done, and they realized that the farmers in the area could grow the hemp crop. They could use the woody core, the woody outside material of the crop as a coal alternative with minimal changes to their current coal-fired power plant. So the farmers in the area started doing this. Their power plant is now fired by hemp. And it's a cleaner burning alternative to coal. But in addition, because like Kobe had mentioned, you can do multiple things with the crop. So that's the outside portion of the plant, of the stalk. The inside, the internal fiber, they're then selling to BMW and Mercedes. And since the mid-2000s, these two car companies have been putting hemp fibers into their door panels. So they're using the composite materials that can be made from the fibers to do that. I've also heard about a company that's in Canada that has built the outside portions of a tractor with hemp-based composites. So we're looking at hemp as being an alternative for aluminum and other metals as well, not just that, but there's companies that are using it as a fiberglass alternative. One of the things about fiberglass is that it takes a lot of energy to create fiberglass, and it's a very harmful process for our environment. Whereas if you're using hemp to create composite materials, it doesn't require near the heat that fiberglass does, and then there aren't all the chemicals that you have to add as the binding components for the compounds. So that's another really unique area, and like Kobe mentioned as well, Henry Ford, was trying to build his Model Ts completely out of hemp. I think it was in the 40s, he ended up building an experimental car, and there's a video of him hitting the back of the car with a hammer or an axe, and it's just bouncing off the panels that are built from hemp, and the paint doesn't scratch. And so it's amazing, but we've lost all of that, and we're just now getting back in. So that's the future. That's several years away, but that's something that I think that we're going to get to in the future.
No, that's all very exciting, and you're right. I guess I'm listening to all of this and everything that you all are saying and thinking, like, why did we ever stop, using this? It seems so silly. Again, can't worry too much about the past. Think about where we're going. I know we have food coming in. People are probably getting a little hungry. We have about 12 minutes left. So actually, I'd like all of the panelists to, in about 2 minutes each, talk about what you think the future actually is. And that can be, next year or 10 years from now. I know we've kind of heard an array of things. And tell us a little bit more about what you see your role being in this hemp future. So we'll start with Greg.
And I'd like to come back to the theme Vince brought up about strategy. Hemp for tribes is a plant around which you can build a comprehensive strategy. And by that I mean you understand now the range of benefits, products, activities that can be built around the plant in terms of itself. But there is an infrastructure economically that can be built around this plant that is really significant for tribes. So for example, when we think about funding, Hemp is a plant for which tribes can get funding, grant funding. Vince and the Native American Agriculture Fund are going to start investing in tribal communities this year for those types of programs. Right now, USDA grants are available to build hemp-related activities. There's a strategy there for you to get the funding necessary to get seeds in the ground, to do value-added products, to build jobs around it. And this is something that if you're thinking about a medium for doing, the future is here today. You can do this now. The next stage in terms of your strategy should be regulation. What Blake and the initiative are working on is for tribes to be able to understand in detail, how do we regulate this industry? That $500 application fee I mentioned that Oklahoma tribes would have to pay to the state this year, that goes away if you regulate hemp yourself. Now, this is your industry. You make the rules within a structure, but you are getting revenue on a governmental level. So when you think about hemp, it's not just a crop. It's not just an economic opportunity. It's something around which a tribe can build an entire economic strategy that has funding available, that has legal structures available, and going back to the theme of Chief Baker this morning, you can build your sovereignty and enhance your sovereignty around this plant as a medium, because you are going to regulate it, you are going to keep the things here within the tribal community, keep the jobs within the tribal community, and avoid things that typically occur with economic activities where capital just flies right out of the tribal community as soon as it comes in. Hemp is something that, when we talk about sustainability, covers everything: environment, economics, and sovereignty, and so well worth the investment of a strategic approach by tribes.
Thank you, Greg. And I can also hear the passion in your speech as well. Everybody on this panel is definitely very, very interested in the future of this crop. Vince, same question for you. What's going to happen, and what's your role in this future?
Well, as I said, I talked to a lot of tribes around the country about economic development over the years, and there's so many opportunities out there and so many great people and economic development professionals within tribes that I love talking to tribes, and people call me about other ideas. But back home, I'm actually known as the, well, they call me a lot of things, but one of them is I'm somewhat of the naysayer. I'm somewhat of the person who looks at something and...
That's the attorney in you,
right, I suppose. But I do want to talk about a couple of quick things and some concepts. I want to talk about tail risk. I want to talk about mitigation and risks in general. This hemp is just one part of the economic plans of tribes, but there are two things that we really need to think about. There's the economic and credit risks involved in any enterprise within tribes, and the economic risks involved here is if we go through a great recession and all of these things, there won't be a lot of building being done. There's all kinds of things you have to consider, particularly if you are borrowing money. Greg is talking about grants, but eventually to have this scalable, you have to probably enter in the capital markets. So you're going to borrow money at an interest rate. You have to think about interest rate risks. It's something that your business analysts can look at. It's something that we all should think about. It's the cost of capital for this industry, for other industries. I'm not just talking about hemp. Here, one thing I heard a lot about is research and development. I don't know of any tribe that really has an active multi-million-dollar research and development program going on. I think for the most part, we either team or borrow or use exclusively, in some cases, research and development from other industries, but that is something that we're going to talk about. It's called innovation. And Aaron is talking about a lot about innovation. That's something that we want to participate in, but that costs a lot of money. And I'm not really sure tribes really have that on their schedule, innovation and research and development, but it's certainly I advocate and have advocated for many years. The last one I looked at here, of course there's the legal and the regulatory piece, but I think that goes without saying. Nothing is really exactly clear, but in business, nothing is 100% clear. That's called tail risk. And tail risk is where something that will happen, the odds of it happening are so slim. I can't really say that about hemp right now, but who knows in 10 years? You asked about 10 years. It might be more, things be more certain at that point. So it will really only be tail risk at that point in the economy. So I hope that helps. I mean, I hope that adds to the panel. There are certain things, I think they call me the buzzkill too, but there are just certain things that a tribal council and tribal business people should consider, and those are a few of the risks that I thought of this morning.
Well, thank you for that, Vince. And certainly mitigating risk is an important piece. And I'm glad you brought up the piece about just the cost of capital. And when you think about scaling, the need to then turn around and borrow that money and things that people need to be aware of, and having business plans that are more robust and long term. So certainly things for the group to think about, certainly challenges that everybody on this panel is going to have in the future as well, I'm sure, as you start working with more and more tribes. Again, same question for Aaron. Where is this all going? What else are we going to be using it for, do you think?
Well, so where it's going is, this is only the 5th year in the United States that people are going to be able to grow this crop. So it's a very new crop, and that's why a lot of what I talk about is innovation. And in Oklahoma, this is the 2nd year that people will be able to grow in Oklahoma. So it's very new, but something that hasn't been talked about yet on this panel is the tax implication that tribes have the access to by growing and cultivating crops on trust land. And so that's one of the big pieces that I see being very beneficial and helpful for tribes that are wanting to get into this industry is the tax advantages that you have when you're not only growing on trust land, but then doing the processing and the development of that on your lands as well, and the jobs that you're creating for people that maybe didn't graduate high school all the way through to the people that have a PhD in engineering. And that's the amazing piece about this crop, and that's what I would like for people to really consider, is that there are a lot of opportunities, but it's cutting edge in that sense, and that there is a lot of risk. But the market is showing, based on 2017 data, there are $820 million worth of retail products sold in the hemp market. So the United States is definitely interested in this, and I think that tribes should be the ones leading this way. And it doesn't matter whether you're close to an urban center or if you're, really far away from an urban center and you're in a very rural area. This is something that can benefit tribes across the United States. You just have to have the land available for it.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you for bringing up the point about how, again, this is something that, really all tribes could possibly utilize. I think that's an important factor. We often think about, well, that business makes sense because it's in XYZ state or because it's located in a metropolitan area. A lot of times when we think about gaming, but the idea that this has utility sort of across the board. I know we have folks here from every which direction. We've got folks certainly from Alaska and kind of all over the state. So that's a really important, I think, thing to focus on as well, and certainly commend you for jumping into this industry that I can only imagine what's going to happen, and I'll be keeping closer eye on the new and exciting things that are happening. So Kobe, as our resident grower, what's the future look like for you?
I don't want to be too cliche, but I've got a T-shirt at home that I wear around. The girlfriend got me, and it's pretty simple. It says the future is hemp. And I really believe that. I believe that because I see the amount of industries that I'm involved in, whether it be energy, agricultural, the pharmaceutical industry, textiles, everything that this crop can go into. And I look at the fact that it's a great rotational crop for crops that are grown today, specifically in Oklahoma. We're rotating this with our wheat crops and our rye crops, our soybeans, everything else, and it cleans up the soil, and so it's going to get us back to a more sustainable way of farming, back to organic practices that can be more possible when you've got a crop that is a weed itself, so you don't need a herbicide. It's resistant to a majority of the pests that we face with our crops today. And it's something that it takes a little bit of fertilizer, but it's also a legume crop that replaces nitrogen in the ground, just like soybeans. And so I've seen some statistical data that's shown that the day will come 5 to 10 years from now where hemp is the 3rd largest crop grown in the state of Oklahoma. I think in the next 3 or 4 years, I think we could surpass China. I think the United States could be the #1 growing country in the world. Up until 4 years ago, it's been restricted. The growing of industrial hemp had been restricted across the U.S. The U.S. is actually the strongest market in the world for hemp-derived products. Yet, up until 4 years ago, our farmers were restricted from growing it. So we're going to replace imported products with products that are grown, manufactured, processed, developed, packaged, everything right here at home. So I do see the future being hemp, and I see that the genetics and the education, those things will come along, and I think it's a huge opportunity for people to get involved. Do it strategically, do it tactically. Don't get in over your head, don't overextend yourself, and partner with the right people. That if you don't have the answers, find the right people that do, and tie yourself to those people for, the chances of success. So.
Thanks, Kobe, and you may want to get more of those T-shirts printed up. It certainly sounds like the future is hemp. Last but not least, Blake Jackson, what does it look like for you?
Are those T-shirts made of hemp fabric?
They actually are.
Excellent.
So I would just want to kind of echo a couple of points here. Being strategic and going forward in tribal business ventures is obviously a key concept, but with hemp growth, it can really present a great opportunity for value-added agriculture, specifically on tribal lands, kind of getting at the tax exemptions and the tax status that could be leveraged for those business opportunities. But also, research has shown that reservation economies could triple if we utilized more of the supply chain of the food dollar on the reservation. So if you were growing a crop like wheat or corn as a grain crop and sending it out, you're just growing that as a commodity crop. But if you engage in the processing and the transportation and you internalize that operation to have more of a vertically integrated enterprise, you could triple the size of a reservation economy doing that based off of the research that's already out there from the USDA on the food dollar. So that's just kind of a little pearl I would like to drop there for the industry of for the potential of this industry. But going forward, we'll need to kind of start from the ground up. Tribes will have to have laws in place and a plan there so that if they want to take on this regulatory authority that the USDA has been given the clearance to regulate and delegate down to tribes, you're going to need those tribal laws in place. And we have a hemp section of our model tribal food and agriculture code at the initiative. It's a free resource. You just have to go to tribalfoodcode.org and sign up for a free account. You can also get there by going through our website, indigenousfoodandag.com, and navigating through there. And all of that's in there. We're currently revising that to meet the 2018 requirements in the Farm Bill, so that's a resource that'll be developed going forward. But just kind of staying involved in the regulatory process and making sure that USDA is brought up to speed on kind of what the tribal sovereignty aspects are here and the unique jurisdictional aspects, because tribes and states will both regulate this, and you will have dual regulators within a close proximity of one another. So just being aware of that and making sure that tribes are heard and have a seat at the table as these conversations unfold.
Thank you, Blake. And with that, we have concluded our first Native Business podcast. So I want to go ahead and read the names and thank my panelists again. We have Mr. Vincent Logan, again, the Chief Financial Officer, Chief Investment Officer, Native American Agriculture Fund. Aaron Fournier, Co-Founder and Chief Operating Officer, Native American Hemp. Greg Goodell, Attorney, Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker. Blake Jackson, Policy Officer and Staff Attorney, Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative at the University of Arkansas, and Mr. Kobe Smith, Principal, Salt Plains Hemp, LLC. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. You are our first audience for the Native Business Podcast, so give yourselves a round of applause.